Welcome to Smile Parent Information Night. We are super excited to have you all here. I hope that everybody got a chance to walk around next door and explore some of the sensory stations that our department set up for you all. Our goal for that really was to let everybody take a second to think about their own sensory systems and some of their own sensory needs, because so often we're focusing on our children and their sensory needs, but we don't think about all of the stimuli and all of the information that our own bodies are processing all day long in every single interaction that we're doing. So we really wanted you to kind of just plant that seed for yourself and maybe just start to think about what are some of your own sort of sensory processing challenges or needs, and maybe what are some of the adaptations or the things that you've done for yourself to be a functioning grown-up in this world. So, or try to be a functioning grown-up in this world like most of us. So we're going to start a little bit so our goals really for you this evening are to learn a little bit more about not just sensory processing, but also social emotional development, and then really start to understand the interconnectedness between those two things and how challenging it can be to separate sensory processing from social emotional development, and to also think about some of your own sensory processing needs and difficulties as well. So we really want you to walk away with a good understanding of these things. So if at any point we're moving too quickly through something and you'd like us to clarify, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask a question. If it's something specific to your child, it might be best to hold it towards the end. But if it's some kind of point of clarification, we're happy to help you work through that. So why occupational therapy? I'm cut off a little bit there, but what is occupational therapy? Occupational therapy fundamentally are skills for the job of living. So our children, what are their occupations? Their occupations are to play and to learn. Children have this innate sort of curiosity and wonder about the world, and the way that they develop their sensory motor systems, and also the way that they develop their cognitive, their learning, and their emotional skills is through this ability to explore their surroundings. And so when a child gets referred for occupational therapy, why is it? It's because something is getting in the way of their ability to play, to learn, to explore. And so many of you are already come to Smile Center, and a lot of times when we start to see children in the early intervention system under 3 years old, a lot of parents will come to us with some concerns about maybe their child's ability to self-soothe or regulate or sleep through the night, or their play skills seem to be hindered, or maybe their social skills don't seem to be where they should be at that age. And then a child enters the preschool environment, and all of a sudden we get different types of concerns and referrals, and maybe it becomes more about the child's inability to focus during circle time, or some difficulty during transitions, or some difficulty attending in the classroom, or during time on the playground. And then a little bit older, 4, 5, 6 years old, maybe we start to hear some more concerns about things like fine motor skills, visual motor skills, reading, learning, motor planning, or keeping up in extracurricular activities and things of that nature. So what do we do about that? It's our job as OTs to look at what's going on with the child and really, dig deeper and find out what's happening. What's going on beneath the surface of just the things that we're seeing that are playing out day to day in the home and the classroom environments. What's getting in the way of this child's challenges in those areas? So it's our job to uncover those things and to ask more questions, and the way that we do that is by looking at what is sensory processing and what is going on with some of the child's sensory motor systems. So, who knows what sensory processing is? Raise your hand.
If you know.
If you think you know, maybe. Oh, nobody. Okay. Some people. Your therapist is in trouble if you don't know. So what is sensory processing? In the most simplistic, basic way, it's our body's ability to take in information from our environment, and for our own internal body, but also from our environment, and to put that information into use integrate it normally all day long in order to function and adapt in the world around us. So, I'm nervous now to show the video because of the technical. Try it? Okay, so we're going to try to play a short video clip. Do you want to explain it all?
This is a video clip of a little boy who has sensory processing difficulties. He also happens to have autism, but the two do not always come together. You can have sensory processing difficulties without any other diagnosis or anything else that's going on. And this is from the ICDL website, and we just really think it's a great little intro that talks about the different systems.
I like to read comics. I also like to go to school. Something that I know a lot about and want to tell you about is sensory processing disorder. SPD is when the messages that your brain gets from your senses are not organized, so you don't respond to things like most people do. This makes it hard to do everyday life stuff like getting ready for the day, going to school, eating, and playing. You can have SPD by itself, or you can have it with other things like autism. I have autism and SPD. Everyone has 7 sensory systems. They are sound, taste, smell, vision, touch, proprioceptive, and vestibular. Under-responsive versus over-responsive. You can think of your sensory systems as being a cup, and water is that type of a sensory input. If you are under-responsive to a certain sensory input, it is like you're a big, huge cup. You keep getting water to the big cup. You can just keep adding, but it never feels full. But if you are over-responsive, it is like you are a tiny cup. All you need is just a little sensory input and you overflow. You want your cup to be full and not spill over. Each of your sensory systems is their own cup and they are different sizes. Just because you have one big cup does not mean you are under-responsive with all your senses. I have a big cup for my proprioceptive and vestibular senses and a little cup for my touch, sound, taste, and smell senses. Everyone is different and unique. Some days and time.
Was that a good example for you? Did that clarify anything for anybody? Yes. Anybody have a big cup or a little cup that they know about? You don't have to tell us. You can just kind of say, yeah, I know. Yeah.
So we really like that representation of the big cup and the little cup because we think it paints a nice picture of how differently every child can present, and that this really isn't a cookie cutter. A child can have a big cup in one system, a little cup in other systems, and so it's our job as therapists to kind of forensically analyze their systems and figure out what to do from an intervention standpoint. So let's go a little bit into the sensory systems. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just to talk a little bit more about each one. So our auditory system, what is the difference between a child's ability to hear but their ability to listen? So there's that processing component there, that ability to filter information, to tune into things appropriately and tune other things that you don't need to pay attention to in that moment appropriately as well. And some of our children also have a really little cup for auditory processing, or they might have a little cup for auditory processing, so really loud sounds like a vacuum cleaner or a toilet bowl flushing really make them nervous. And similarly in our visual system, it's not just whether or not we need glasses and can we see, but are our eyes working together? Are the muscles in our eyes working together to be able to track? Are we able to visually process visual information within our environment? Are we able to properly process to filter out visual information that we don't need to visually attend. And our vestibular sense is our connectedness, the way that we feel connected to our body. It's the way that we know whether our body's right side up or upside down. So if you have a big cup for vestibular processing, you might be a thrill seeker, somebody that really loves roller coasters. And if you have a little cup for vestibular processing, you might be somebody who gets really easily carsick or seasick. And it's really, it's so difficult, and it's essentially impossible to separate any of the sensory systems. They're all so closely interconnected, and you can't really isolate one and look at one without looking at the others as well. So if you think about, an example I like to use is if you think about when you're at a party and you are engaging in a conversation with a friend of yours, and maybe there's a DJ in the background or a band in the background, but it's not bothering you in that moment, you can still have a conversation even though there might be hundreds of people around you. And then maybe somebody calls your name in the corner and you're all of a sudden able to tune into that. Or maybe something startles you and a glass breaks and everybody kind of, their systems become alert all of a sudden. And so our ability to kind of filter, tune in, tune out, shift attention, that's happening on an ongoing basis every day. And if you think about maybe after a few glasses of wine, what that same experience might feel like, maybe your vestibular system's a little bit off, or there's a little bit of a delay there. And maybe you're not feeling as connected to your own body. Maybe you're not feeling as connected to your environment. So our tactile system is our ability to process touch. So a big cup for tactile processing might be your kiddo that can't get enough of smearing things all over their body or running and crashing their body into different things. And a little cup for tactile processing might be wearing, certain types of textures or fabrics, walking on sand, walking on grass, some of those kind of standard challenges with tactile processing. And proprioceptive processing is our ability to process input through our muscles and our joints. So you might have a really big cup for proprioceptive processing if you're the kind of person that needs to work out and lift weights every single day to help yourself feel kind of grounded and ready. Or you might, for our kids, maybe that looks like they're constantly running around and seeking input in that way as well. So, and it's important to note, I think, that the tactile and proprioceptive systems are really what make up our fundamental sense of body awareness. And so, without this sense of where our body is in space, without feeling connected to your own, to your own body, it's really difficult and really challenging to process all of the other information, to move through the world in a way where you can make sense of everything else. So, if we know a little bit more about what sensory processing is, we fundamentally, as OTs, believe that, we know that these systems develop from the ages of birth to 5, and that they really do function as an integrated whole, and then also as subsets of one another, and that through this wiring in the brain, we're able to impact some of the other systems, maybe indirectly through addressing one, and influencing the other. And we can do that through play, because children have such an innate willingness and ability to explore. They're curious, they're scientists, and it's through these experiences of play, these natural experiences, that they're constantly getting different types of feedback. They're constantly adapting to their world, and that's how they're really developing confidence, and that's how they're facing some emotional challenges and working through these moments. So we believe that the central nervous system is plastic and can be rewired, and that we have the ability to make changes. So Sara's going to talk a little bit more specifically about what regulation is.
Okay, so what is regulation? Does anybody think they have an idea of about what regulation is? Just raise of hands. Okay, so regulation is really the ability to adapt and adjust to the conditions of the environment and modify your energy level based on what's going on around you. So we find a just right state that matches what we're doing in that moment. So think about you're going to sleep and you turn the lights off and you get in bed and you calm your body down and then you're able to fall asleep. Or think about going to a sports game or a concert and it's really high energy and you may be dancing or you may be cheering or jumping up and down, and think about what your body is like in that situation.
Now think about trying to go to sleep when your body feels like it's at a sports game. So how difficult is it to fall asleep in that type of situation? Or vice versa, you're at a sports game and your body feels like you're ready to go to sleep, and how can you participate and, be excited in that type of situation? Oh, sorry. So we're constantly adapting in every situation, and that's how we all regulate, but this is really challenging for our children. Maybe they can't fall asleep most nights or some nights because their body is running on that high energy, or they're at school and they're at recess and they're playing and running around, and then they have to come into the classroom, sit at the table, and participate in an activity. And how does that shifting their arousal level affect their ability to participate? So how does inefficient regulation and sensory processing impact our everyday skills, learning, and behavior? So like Kelly mentioned, we often get referrals for OT for specific skills that are difficult. So handwriting, sitting in circle time, attending to a book, whatever it may be. But before we can address the specific skill, we really have to look at the sensory processing and the regulation, which is kind of like the root of it. So we need to we need to get to the root of the problem in order to build the solid foundation, so then we can develop the skills on top of that. So, I guess you can see most of it. The house is a really good visual representation of this because, the foundation of the house is all of our sensory systems and our ability to use them, interpret the information, and respond appropriately. And then, going up from there, our sensory systems help us develop our body scheme, our motor planning, postural security, using both of our sides of our body together, motor planning, our body in space, all of those things are developed from our integration of our sensory systems. So then building upon that, we use our auditory and language skills and attention in order to participate in the classroom and learn, and our eye-hand coordination, gross motor skills to play on the playground, participate in extracurricular activities, socialize with peers, and then really at the roof of the house is based on the rest of the house, and this is often where we see the areas of breakdown in most of our kids, and what we get referrals for is has difficulty participating in activities of daily living, like getting dressed or eating or whatever, grooming, academics and behaviors. So all of these things at the roof of the house are really impacted by sensory processing and regulation. And you can build a house on a foundation that isn't so solid, but once a big wind comes, for example, it may knock the house down because the foundation isn't really there.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Sure.
That diagram, where's that from?
Where's it from? Is it from Ayers?
Do you know where it's from?
There's a it's on the columbusbeach.org.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, I guess it's off on there.
If you would just Google sensory house.
Okay, thank you.
So, you saw in the video, and I don't, if you noticed in the other room, that we all, our sensory processing challenges all run on a continuum, and we all have individual differences, and the intensity of our sensory processing challenge and how it's affecting us really determines whether we can be successful in whatever we're participating in. So, maybe you are in a meeting, or you're in this presentation, or you're doing a presentation, and you do you have certain strategies and coping mechanisms that help you to regulate, attend. You may be shifting in your chair, you may chew gum, you may be chewing on a pen, and those are all things that we do, strategies that we use to help us regulate and attend in certain situations. The typical profile and presentation of the child varies, and from the video, some people have big cups for certain things and little cups for other things, and
Some people have high activity level and some people have low activity level, and response to certain situations may be different. Some kids may have a fight or flight, that means running away from it or shutting down or screaming on the top of your lungs, whatever it may be. And different environmental factors come into play. So a child in a classroom may have a lot of difficulty because there's all this visual information or auditory information or lots of kids moving around, versus being at home where there may not be all of that information. It's quieter and they can function easier. So it's just really important to keep in mind our own individual needs and differences, as well as our children's, just when we're interacting. Thank you.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about social emotional development. Now, social emotional development is very much tied to sensory processing, regulation. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And it's very important to what we do here at SMILE. So when we talk about social emotional development, we're talking about it in the context of the Functional Emotional Assessment Scale, the FEAS, which was created by Dr. Stanley Greenspan and Georgia DeGangi in 2001. And it's an observation-based assessment that essentially looks at a child engaged in play with their primary caregiver. And it looks at how the child responds to the parent, how the parent responds to the child, how the child explores the environment, interacts with things in the environment. And it defines a hierarchy of social emotional development. So I'm just going to run through the stages of the FEAS and just talk about how each stage builds on the last and how they're all related. So the fundamental stage, the foundation of all of this, is self-regulation and interest in the world. So think about a newborn baby. A newborn baby is entirely dependent on their caregiver. Their entire needs at that moment are for survival, right? We need to make sure that they're clothed. We need to make sure that they're fed. They need help regulating their own body temperature. And in the beginning, that's really what it's about, right? Keeping them safe, keeping them alive. And then as their systems start to mature and they start to stabilize, they start to be able to take on some of the ability to self-soothe. They are able to regulate a little bit more, and they're able to take in the world around them. They're able to start to just see what's going on around them in the world, and once they're able to regulate, they're able to stay calm when their needs are being met. They're able to start exploring toys, and they should be able to engage in play without becoming upset, as long as their needs are being met. So as this is happening, all of these systems are maturing. They're moving into the next stage. What happens at 6 weeks approximately? A baby smiles, right? And what happens when a baby smiles for the first time? Everybody around them gets so excited, right? Everyone is responding. Everyone's cooing. I mean, this is all happening anyway, but it's just really a wonderful moment. And the baby is getting so much response for this thing that they're doing now. And it feels good. We are naturally very social. We crave being with others. And so it just feels good, and they seek it out more. And this is the beginnings of communication. This is laying that foundation. At the same time, their other systems are developing. They're starting to move around a little bit more. And maybe as they're moving their arm, they knock this toy that's sitting on the carpet next to them, and they happen to hit this button, and it happens to play this really cool sound. And they think, oh, I liked that. That was really neat. I want to do that again. And then they start to try to figure out how to do that, this time purposefully, right? So they went from something that was unintentional to a purposeful, intentional action. So this is all just kind of happening and building on the last thing. Everything that a child experiences is being filed away. It's information that they're building upon constantly. And as they're developing, they're able to engage for longer periods of time. They start to do things like imitate what their caregivers are doing, right? So mom or dad is bringing a cup to their mouth, and they think, oh, I want to bring a cup to my mouth, and they do it. But they don't really understand what that means yet. They're just starting to imitate these things and incorporate these ideas into their play. But as they move into the next stage of representational capacity, they start to understand that that has meaning. So they're not just taking a cup and bringing it to their mouth. They're saying, oh, I'm pretending to drink tea with mom and dad. We're having a tea party. They start to have this pretend play. And maybe they start feeding their dolls cookies. They go to feed it to mom. They go to feed it to dad. And dad says, you know what? I don't really want a cookie. And they have to sit there and think, oh man, Dad doesn't want a cookie. What am I going to do? And they have to figure out, oh, maybe Dad will eat a cracker. Do you want a cracker, Dad? And Dad eats it. And they've just problem solved. So this is all laying the foundation. It's the building blocks of these higher level skills that are so critical to our everyday lives. And when as they move into the last stage, representational differentiation, essentially these pretend play ideas are becoming more and more complex. They're stringing together these ideas. They're exploring their own emotions. They're really exploring these themes through their play. They've experienced things in their lives. Let's say they've had an injury or something has been scary, and Mom and Dad, or Grandma, Grandpa, anybody has comforted them. And as they're playing, these ideas come up. Maybe they are pretending that they went to the restaurant and they're sitting and having a meal and the doll falls on the floor. Oh no, the doll got hurt. What are we going to do? And they're taking care of the doll and they're figuring out what to do, and this is building this more elaborate idea. Play is the opportunity for children to develop these skills and also to explore their own emotions, explore ideas, and adapt them and use them in different situations. So what is the connection between sensory processing and social emotional development? Let's think back to that first level. The very foundation of all of this is self-regulation. Self-regulation and interest in the world. If you're not regulated, if your needs aren't being met, if you're not feeling safe and secure in your own body, in the environment, then you can't really be present and available for these really rich social experiences that allow you to develop these skills. So this is another visual representation, like the house, showing how everything is built on each other. If your sensory needs are not being met, if you're not feeling safe and secure, then you aren't able to be aware of things that are happening outside of you being focused on that. You're not able to shift your focus and filter out the things that are unnecessary. You're not able to really be emotionally connected with another person, have these social interactions, and develop these higher level skills. So an example that I really like of what this might be like is, let's say you're walking late at night, you're in an area that you don't really feel is very safe, you are in a dark area, you're trying to get to your car, and all of your senses are heightened, right? Every little sound, every little movement catches you. You're just so aware of your surroundings because you're just worried about your safety. And let's say your phone rings, and it's your friend, and you pick it up, and they start talking to you about this party that they're having this weekend. And they're telling you, oh, we're going to have this, we're going to have that, but I'm worried about so-and-so and so-and-so because they're not really getting along right now. And you're probably sitting on that phone going, yeah, But you're not really paying attention to what they're talking about, right? Because you're so concerned at that moment about your safety. So you're talking, you're having a conversation, but you're not really engaged. And that's probably what it's like for some of our kids. If they're not really feeling secure, if they're very sensitive to something in their environment, if they're not really able to be present, then they're not getting that rich experience that they should be getting, that they would be getting otherwise. And at the same time, a child who has a really big cup, who's not getting enough stimulation to be aware of what's happening, they're also not tuning in. They're also not getting that rich experience that leads to this development. Okay, so Alison spoke a bit about it, but what happens now when there's a breakdown in social emotional development? It all goes kind of back to that house metaphor, right? What was that foundational piece? It was regulation. It was meeting your needs. Sometimes we see children that struggle so much with self-regulation and so significantly impacts on their life and their play and their ability to interact with their environment that they're not able to kind of build up higher on these skills because they're so concentrating on surviving in the minute. And then there's, similar to what Sara was talking about before, where you have a foundation, but it might not be such a solid foundation. And here and there, you're able to build on some of these skills and play and learn and find all those higher level those pieces. See, and so this house is filled more with concentration, self-organization, these higher social emotional skills instead of the functional skills. So you might see some of these here and there, but just with the other house, if the foundation, the sensory processing is compromised, if anything comes along, the house can come tumbling down. So what are some of the things we see in the house in social emotional development? concentration, self-organization, self-esteem, self-control, confidence, ability to learn, problem solving. These are all things that as adults we need, and as children we need to develop to be functional human beings. And when there is a bit of a breakdown, that's kind of where we see some of the difficulties with our children. We also can sometimes see a development of splinter skills. And splinter skills are a skill that you could see in a particular time, in a particular moment, but they're not yet generalized to all situations, and they're not able to be used adaptively throughout their day. So an example of this is maybe a child was taught or played a bunch of times with a baby doll, and one of their play schemes to go to is the baby is sad and we're going to make the baby feel better, so we rock the baby and we pat the baby, and they know what to do in that moment. You see them play that over and over again, but then they walk into the next room and they see their little baby sister, and she's crying. Maybe she's the same size as the doll and looks exactly like the doll, but they have no idea how to soothe this baby. So it looks like they might have a skill, but they're not able to use that skill and adapt that skill to kind of all environments. So it's important to know that a child in any of these situations, with any of these houses and build-ups, that they're functioning at the level of breakdown. When this house comes tumbling down, they're back at that foundational level. So a good example maybe of this is maybe you have a very hyperverbal child who could communicate to you a whole entire story about their day usually, but for some reason they can't come home one day and something is very off and they're all over their place and they're just trying to calm themselves down. You say, hey, what did you do today? And they can't answer you. They physically and mentally cannot answer you in that moment. They're in survival mode. Their house has broken down. They're at their basic self-regulation state. So keep that in mind. When there's a breakdown, that's where they're functioning in the moment. Even though you might see some higher level skills here and there throughout the day, or typically, they're functioning at the level of breakdown. So sensory versus behavior. So we get this question a lot. A lot of the times children come here, they come here for a behavior. So what's the difference, right? So as OTs, we believe that all observed behaviors are rooted in some sort of sensory processing difficulty. That's basically the foundation. And children don't want to struggle just to struggle, and they're not having a hard time just to give you a hard time. That there is some underlying rooting difficulty that they're having, and that's the manifestation happens to be the behavior. In reality, do children sometimes go and learn a behavior from something and they get satisfaction out of something and it turns into a routine? Sure. But it's so super important not to just blow it off as behavior, because if there is some underlying foundational sensory base to this behavior and you're not addressing it and you're just addressing the particular behavior that you're seeing, more than likely, maybe that one behavior will go away, but something else is going to show its ugly face, because that underlying foundational piece, that sensory processing piece, is not being addressed. So some of the typical behaviors that we see here are, struggles to transition between activities. These might be some of our kids that have motor playing difficulties, and in the moment they know what they're doing, they know what's expected of them, but the teacher says, okay, it's time to go to free play, and they're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to pick? What am I supposed to do? How do I start this? How do I carry this out? How am I going to figure out what to do with my body? And it kind of dysregulates them and brings them to those different arousal states where now their house has fallen and they're functioning back down at regulation. Or difficulties with sleep patterns, and this goes kind of back to what Sara was talking about before. If you're feeling like that you're at a baseball game and you're supposed to go to sleep, there's an imbalance with that arousal level. Challenges during mealtime, difficulty with self-care routines, and this one is interesting, along with kind of all of them. A go-to for self-care, sometimes you see your children don't really like taking baths, right? So you're thinking in your head, okay, this means that my daughter has a really little cup for touch, right? She's going in the bath, she really does not like her hair washed, it's touch. But maybe that's not it. Maybe she really doesn't like the fact that when you're washing her hair, she's tipping her head backwards, and she has a poor sense of where her body is in space, and when you do that, that's completely disorganizing, and that's why she doesn't want to take a bath. It's not necessarily a cut and dry. And a behavior could be a manifestation of a lot of different kind of underlying things. Sometimes children that rely heavily on routine, they're rigid or controlling, you see them zoning out, intense tantruming, being socially withdrawn, acting out with peers. Kids want to be social. Maybe they don't know how to manipulate a conversation. So what they do know how to do with a peer and what makes their body feel good is that deep input. So I'm going to push you, and that's how I know how to interact with you. It's not necessarily that they're being mean. They're trying their best to interact in that particular situation. And then sometimes we get, oh no, Lynne, it's definitely just behavior, because at school, I'm not seeing any of this. They're little angels at school, and then they come home, and they're running all over the place, and I can't feed them dinner, and they're just a mess at home. Or the opposite. At home, they're perfect, and now I'm getting this report from school that they're not listening, and they're getting up and down out of their chair, and I don't know what's going on. But it's definitely behavior, because it's not happening everywhere, and if it was sensory, it would be everywhere, right? No, it's not right. Some of our children have spatial processing difficulties where they're in a school and there's lots of lights and there's lots of kids and unpredictability, and they're having to survive in that situation. And maybe that's the breakdown. At home, it's nice and calm. They know what to expect. Mommy's there to hug me if I get a little out of my sorts. Or a kid with exactly the same profile who's socially aware and holding it all together during the day, so as I know I'm supposed to behave at school, and then they get home and you hand them the wrong color sippy cup, and that's it. I'm comfortable at home, I'm safe at home, I'm letting loose. I held this together all day long, and now I can't hold it in anymore. So there's a huge range of behaviors. There's a huge environmental factor, and like I said before, it's not always a super obvious answer. So that's kind of where we come to meeting individual needs. Like we saw before, and hopefully you guys all kind of thought as you were walking through, oh yeah, I really am somebody that thrives on lots of proprioceptive input. My cup for proprioceptive input is really big. Or the opposite. It's important to kind of look at your own individual needs and your child's individual needs. Which cups are big, which cups are little, what do they really like, what do they really hate, what do they struggle with, what do they thrive with. Even if you're not fully understanding sensory processing, what do they like, what do they not like? And then you're going to look at your personal traits. What do I like, what do I not like? And how am I going to best meet my personal traits with my child's personal traits? It's super important to be mindful that the way that we respond in situations can impact on how our child functions and responds in that moment. So a good example of this is you're super, super excited that your best friend just had a brand new baby, and you can't even control yourself, you're so excited, and you go over to their house and you see that baby, and you're like, oh my god, this is the cutest baby I've ever seen in my whole entire life, let me grab him. And maybe this baby has a really little cup for that kind of stuff, and either you set that baby off screaming, or you shut down that baby completely and they want nothing to do with you. Or that baby could be a little bit of a low arousal baby, and that's exactly what that baby needs in that moment to kind of perk up and be like, ooh, this person is kind of fun, So co-regulation, the way that you're interacting, can influence on the response that you may get. And there's no right or wrong. It's just sometimes in some situations, the energy that we're giving off, it's important to be mindful that sometimes if you're demonstrating a nice, calm demeanor because your child is really not calm in that moment, that they might feed off of your energy and they might bring themselves back down. And this is a child that maybe struggles with that, and we might not struggle so much with that. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to adapt to the way that you're responding in a situation to help them respond to the situation. It's tricky, and it's situational, and that's kind of where we come in. We can discuss that with you and troubleshoot with you and try to kind of help you figure out the best kind of way, or the most functional way in those moments to best assess your child's need in that moment. So it's really, really a hard thing to do, to be so self-aware and to be able to we're constantly doing that ourselves while we're working with children. You know, we always have to check in with ourselves. Am I doing what this child needs at this moment? So this is just planting the seed. Think about it as you go home tonight. Think about yourself. Think about your child. And we really hope that this will start a conversation with your OT, that this is something that you can now, as you've seen all of this information, you can go back to whoever's working with your child and say, okay, I'm ready. Let's talk about this. I've noticed this, and this. Help me figure this out. And that's what we're here for.